one's on.
This one isn't. This one is not working.
Is she switched on the back of it?
It's switched on. It is not working.
There you go. Just lean that way.
Okay. Good morning. We're going to improvise a little bit. You bear with us. We're glad you're here. We appreciate many of you being here every time we've met. And we're glad to have some new folks this morning. I'm going to ask Chairman Nick, to open our meeting in prayer, please.
Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for the sunshine of the day, and Lord, that we got through the day yesterday without serious issues. Father, we thank you for life itself and for the ability to serve our fellow man. Just pray that the things that we do and say today would be pleasing to you. Lord, that we would be able to get to these issues that are so important for the students in our state. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you. And before we start, I just want to thank these folks up here for tolerating my lack of knowing what I've been doing in this committee. And I've learned a lot, and you've been wonderful. Courtney's been great. We could not have asked for a better person to have from policy than Courtney. I appreciate all of you. Thank you. And we're going to move quickly, and if we move quickly enough, we might even have some time for you to say that's good or that's not, or go back and look at some things. So, with that said, what I'd like to do is just start with, what are your thoughts? What is your top recommendation from everything you've heard that you think needs to come from this committee?
This is just a compiled list.
Anybody want to go?
Well,
Okay.
I'll go.
Okay. Chairman Nix.
I said early on that one of the reasons I wanted to be on the committee was to look at what we're doing in the area of career counseling. And it's obvious as we went through this that this is it does not rise to be a really high priority in many situations, simply because of the other issues that are there that that probably should override it when you've got children who are homeless, or you got all sorts of things they've been through. But one of the things I would like to come out of it is one of the things that, Madam Chair, you and I have talked about, is some type of ability to get some help in that area to help our counselors be able to make sure that they can fill that square. We talked about trying to do that through a RESA person, and I know I talked with Bob Swigum. I think you might have spoken with him too, be able to use technology some way to be able to accomplish that. And I know some of you who are counselors may be thinking, well, I've got the cart before the horse here, but the only way we get away from the other issues that we've got out there that we're struggling with, the poverty issues and everything else, is we've got to get these people into a job where they become a productive member of society rather than falling into the same situation that a lot of them are in right now. So that is one of the main things I would like to see happen, some way to enhance our our college and career counseling portion of the duties of the counselors.
Thank you, Chairman. And I think that's something that we've heard repeatedly. And we know that that's an issue that's very important in our state, of course, and we've got to deal with it. I would refer everyone to what I sent you yesterday afternoon, David Hill's comments. We received yesterday an email from Dr. Hill, and I thought his recommendations were very succinct, very well stated, and very comprehensive, included much of what we were saying. And I think I remember, Chairman, that was alluded to somewhere in these, but I haven't been able to put my finger on it right this minute. But thank you for your comments. And is that Representative Clark down there? Okay.
I also agree with Dr. Hill's comments, and I think the most important thing we need to do is train our counselors in the college setting to make sure when they get out and they're working with teachers, principals, students, that they are very comfortable in their role. They know what they're doing. They've done it before in terms of a student teaching type atmosphere, and so when they hit the ground, they know what they're doing.
Okay. Do you feel that Dr. Hill's recommendations regarding the pre-service and professional development in-service training covers most of that?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Representative?
I
Okay.
do.
And I would refer you committee members to his items 5 and 6. Not only does he talk, and I'll read those quickly for those of you in the audience. It is recommended that preparation programs for school and district leaders include specific content on the role of the school counselors as well as teacher and leader roles in addressing college and career readiness and equity issues. This recommendation can be accomplished by requiring this content in Tier 1 leadership preparation programs, which would be the master's level programs that begin in the summer of 2016, and in Tier 2 leadership preparation programs that begin in the summer of 2017. And I think those would be specialists and doctoral levels. In the item 6, it is recommended that school and school district leaders currently holding leadership positions complete training during their next certificate renewal cycle on the role of the school counselor, as well as leader and leader roles in addressing college and career readiness and equity issues. So do we all agree that this needs to be there?
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Gazaway, is that okay with you? Yes. And
I think those are items that yes, this committee certainly needs to recommend them, but those are not things that need to be legislated. Those are things that the Professional Standards Commission does by rule and regulation, which allows them to much more quickly and appropriately impact those and make changes as they see it needed.
And Representative Chairman Dixon, you know far better than I, but I've been told by the folks at DOE and also in the Professional Standards Organization that our recommending would give some impetus to further carrying out what they're talking about doing. Is that correct?
Yes, I'd say that's correct. I mean, they would prefer that it be done through rule or regulation, and when you put the recommendation in there, then it's like, well, maybe we need to do this before they do legislate something. So that I think that's where it gets its strength from.
Thank you. And Representative Gazaway.
I just wanted to, I agree, sure, these recommendations are good. I met with 80% of the counselors in my district prior to this hearing starting back in October, I guess, when we started, or September, and my area I've tried to get the information 3 times now so that we could really pinpoint where the high-density schools are as far as high-ratio students to counselors, and somehow it's gotten lost in translation, where I still would like to find out if there's a correlation to specific economic challenges for these counties, because I know Habersham County, which I represent, has, I think, the highest ratio of students to counselors of any that we've talked about. And I don't know how we do that, how we fix that problem. When you've got a counselor servicing 700 and plus children at a high school setting, it's not good. But I know what happened in Habersham County. I know economically what's happened there. I know what's happened economically in Stevens County and Banks County. But I don't know around the state. But I would really still like to see where these high ratio schools are, so that we could understand if there's an economic, a micro economic thing that's happened in those communities that would contribute to this. Now, that being said, that school board voted to put in a $2.5 million athletic field this week, so maybe money's not the priority. I don't know, but I do think that those counselors have too much on them, and I don't know what we do as part of this to fix that, but I'm certainly for trying to figure that out. But I would love to know if it's our rural schools where these high densities are, as far high ratios. Is it our poverty schools? Is it our schools where there was counties with a lot of bank failures that have had a really significant collapse economically, like those 3 counties that I represent? Just from my own knowledge, because we have had rural communities that have really suffered since 2009, and maybe this is just another area where that's manifesting itself.
Dr. Ziegler, do you know that?
From the survey that we sent out, we just asked about regions rather than specific counties, and that's where the breakdown was. But I can say that in Gwinnett County, Maria Verona, that works with me at the department, she served over 600 students herself at a middle school, and that's obviously not a rural area.
Yeah.
So if we can send another
afraid so,
survey out
too.
or something, we can talk about that, and we will try to get that information. We didn't get the information, we just didn't.
I had asked for it, but I guess it got lost in translation. And I know, but a lot of the people we heard from were sub 400 ratio people who seemed to, from what the testimony they gave, have some very positive programs going. Now, that being said, I know that counselors in Habersham County are doing career work. They're going to the middle schools and the elementary schools, teaching lessons about careers. I know that's happening. I also have counselors that are, these are my constituents too. I know these people personally that are ready to quit the job because they're asked to do 3 times as much as they can do. So I'm really trying to understand how, as in this process, we can help that. And you know, we hear about career coaches take some of this away, and you know, I don't know, but I know I got some counselors that are pulling their hair out at the high school level in those counties, and that's what I'm. Maybe it is statewide. Maybe it's not a demographic issue, but I know we've had some testimony from counselors that have very positive programs going, it sounds like, that they could only do if they had a lower ratio.
I'm curious, is Habersham IE Square or charter?
I think they just became IE squared, but I'm not sure. Maybe they're in the process. But Banks is charter. Yeah, I think it's right now in that part of it. And, you know, I get anecdotal feedback that I'm not going to share in a public hearing about how things happen. But, you know, and I'm learning here, too. As I said, I'm the junior. I'm the youngster on this committee. So I'm open to feedback. But I would just love to know, just my analytical mind, where these high ratio schools are, if they are evenly distributed across the state, or can we see some geographical sort of explanation that will correlate with the economic collapse that we've all lived through.
You're just saying that because you're the youngest. I know. You want to point that out. That's right. That's what it is. Well, as you have heard during these hearings, these meetings, the American School Counselor Association recommends 1 to 250. Of course, we're worlds from that, but I just want us to keep that in mind. And I'm going to ask, Chairman Dixon has a world of knowledge about the funding, and he's been on the committee that's looking at changing funding. I'm going to ask him to address this.
Under the QBE formula, as we know it, of course, the funding ratio is supposed to be at 1 to 450. In the recommendations that are coming from the funding subcommittee of the Education Review Commission, it's a different formula in the sense that there is a student base amount that's not really broken down to say this is earned this way and this way and this way. And things that are in that base are primarily the teacher salary, and counselors are one of the items that will be in that base. Now, in creating that number initially, coming up with what that base would start out as, the money for counselors was calculated at the 1 to 450 ratio, which funding through QBE had not been at that ratio the last 2 years. It had been, what, 1 to 475, something like that. So the chances of getting it dropped to 1 to 250 obviously are pretty low. Because the new funding formula as it stands is going to requires several hundreds of millions of dollars more than what the current funding for QBE is. Hopefully it's going to be, when it's finished, it's going to be equivalent to or greater than what QBE would be if it was fully funded. And when I say fully funded, I'm talking about for what the formula calls for, not what it actually should be calling for. I mean, we recognize that there are large parts of QBE that have never had an update based on cost of living types of increases, but to get the funding formula up to where it produces what the formula calls for is one of the things that will, in my opinion, be done by this new formula. So that, you have to layer that on top, though, of the fact that virtually every system in the state, with the exception of 2, going forward is either going to be a charter system or an IE square system, and that means that they're going to have supposedly much greater flexibility in how they spend this money. And so tying down a system as to whether they are putting funds into counselors on that ratio of 1 to 450 is going to be much more difficult to get that kind of information going forward. All you're going to be able to do is see how many counselors they have and divide it by the student population, but you won't be able to tie the dollars back to it.
With that said, do we include in our recommendations lowering the counselors' student ratio? Do we, with that said, do we include in our recommendations, because that's what I think we've heard consistently, and that's what you're alluding to, Representative Gazaway. Do we include in our recommendations lowering the counselor-student ratio? Well, with what I was thinking about, with to 1 to 450, with a consideration of lowering it in increments in the future, something like that. Do we do that or not?
Well, I think you can put a recommendation in that we continue to look at trying to lower that ratio, but I think in many schools you're going to have more positive impact on the ability of counselors to do their work if we can find a way to convince systems or schools to take away from counselors so much of the mundane record keeping, greeting new students kinds of things that counselors are having to do, that takes away from their time to do these other things.
And how do we do that?
That's your job.
Oh.
80-20 ratio?
Well, now, Courtney's pointed out that there was a recommendation along the way. Something was said about counselors working with students at a ratio of 80 to 20, so 80% of their time with students. We already have in law 4 out of 5 segments of the school day. Now, does it make it more understandable if we say 80% of the time, and do we need to do something like that? Would that help?
When you say working with students 80% of the time, does it specify counseling students or just working with students?
Direct, I believe it says, and you all may have to have direct services to students and parents, I believe, are included.
Counseling services?
Direct, which could be meeting with parents at night,
Right,
you know, but that's not in the school day, but meeting with them during the school day.
Is that happening?
I would hope so.
I don't think it is.
You don't think it is? Oh.
Not 5 or 6 segments.
Oh, not 5 or 6 segments. No, I don't think it is either. No, I think most many school systems are ignoring that is in the law. So would that put some teeth to it if we did some legislation that said 80% of time?
How are you going to enforce it?
Well, it's a question of flexibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If anything you put into Title 20 is going to be subject to the potential of a waiver. And something like that becomes almost unenforceable. I mean, most of what a counselor does, even if it's a mundane task that we want to take them away from, involves something with direct impact on students. So most systems would say they're following the law. They're just following the letter of the law, not the intent of the law.
I think so much of that is indirect services. You know, if I'm doing clerical work, for example, as a counselor, that is, and I may be doing something I may be filing. And that happens, filing in the vault. And if that happens, that's indirect, of course. Representative Clark.
Madam Chairman and Chairman Dixon, I think you began with saying recommend, that you would recommend, and that might be the way to go, just keep it as a recommendation that we would continue to look at lowering the ratio rather than put it into law.
Is that what I'm hearing, everybody?
I'm fine with making a recommendation, yes.
Chairman Nix.
Yes. When we talked about this earlier, we put in the idea of somehow incentivizing the administration to do this. And I'd probably have to defer back to somebody who would understand how that would do. Chairman Dixon, is there any way we could incentivize school leadership to use them in this function, whether better scores on their school climate or whatever? Can you think of any way we might do that? I hesitate to, in a world where we're trying to grant more flexibility, to try to force something, but if we can encourage something with a string attached to it that somebody sees a benefit from, maybe that would be a better way if it's possible. Some of you who have been in school administration may have an idea. I'm just throwing out an idea. Does that? I think Chairman Dixon might be one that could address that. Do you have any idea if that would be a feasible way to do it?
I mean, it's.
You want to think a minute and let Representative Clark reply?
Oh, I'd love to let her reply.
I was just never turned off.
Oh, oh, I thought you had some valuable information to share. I do remember someone in one of our meetings, or either someone with whom I spoke, mentioned that if we could tie the role of the school counselor more to the school climate report, and that's what you're saying, that might help with this. Ready now?
Yeah, I mean, if there's some way to tie it into this, the way they earn points for their evaluation, that certainly that would put a little incentive to it. But I mean, we got to keep in mind the things that the counselors are doing, even though they're things we would rather that somebody else did them, they're things that have to be done. And so simply saying that we want to take this burden off of counselors, systems have got to come up with some way to do those things at that point. I mean, and that's going to involve additional personnel in many cases. I mean, we haven't helped anybody really if we simply take it off of the counselor and turn around and give it to the teacher to do. Or, I mean, this is not an easy solution. There's not an easy solution to it because the work has to be done. I mean, that's the bottom line. These are things that have to be done. Now, I think that I have seen high schools where they have had more appropriate ways to do it, but it involved additional personnel. They hired in a high school, they hired a registrar who dealt with scheduling issues and a lot of the paperwork kinds of things that other counselors are having to do. So incentives are good, but the bottom line, somebody's got to do the work. And I know that if I were sitting in a school somewhere, I'd say, send me more money and I'll hire somebody to do the work that you don't want the counselor to do. Unfortunately, I'm on the other side of that saying, I'm sorry, there isn't any more money. So somebody else going to have to come up with his answer.
But Chairman Dixon, I have to say this, and you know this too, that the school counselor who's making $50,000 a year plus is not the person when you could hire a clerical person at $25,000 or $30,000 to do that. So how do we get to that point? Not an answer.
You have some other members on this committee.
Yeah, but you're the money person on this committee. And we do,
but hiring that 25,000, and this is going to sound like I'm defending school systems, and I guess I am to a certain degree. Hiring that $25,000 person to do that paperwork doesn't eliminate the $50,000. So doing what you're saying means the school system's got to come up with additional funds, and they are stretched about as far as they can stretch in most cases for local funds.
Representative.
This is a really tough dilemma. When we started this, I talked to our Hall County school superintendent, who I have a lot of respect for, Will Schofield. He's testified up here at the Capitol many times. And he said pretty much what Tom's saying. He said, we're all stretched. Because my approach with him was, well, can't you take some of this off the counselors if we cannot have the money to increase the number? At least let them go to do what they do, what they've been trained to do. And his answer was just what Tom said. He said, well, then who's going to do it? We're all stretched. We and right now we have a budget, state budget of 54% for education. And we want to put more money in it. But we're also getting stretched on the health care side. That's gone up to 22 and it's going higher. So we've heard a lot of great testimony. And what you sent us the other day, I think that from Dr. Hill had some really great points. But I'm reticent or reluctant rather to put some of those in motion because I have a sister that's a teacher. I have two daughter-in-laws that are teachers, and they feel like they're getting pushed on all the time. And require counselors to be reevaluated as far as their educational training and things of that nature when they're already being stretched so hard. We may lose some of the very best ones because they're so committed that they feel like they're failing. So I don't know that that's the route. I think for us to highlight through the BOE, through that direction, to highlight and try to recommend to the high schools to please reevaluate the functions of your school counselors and direct that focus to allow them to do more in counseling and that kind of approach. I think that's the best avenue for us right now. I sure like Randy's approach about finding incentives. I mean, that's a positive way, and I think if anything we need in our school systems right now are more positive directions rather than negative. I just feel like they get hit all the time, and they're doing the best job they can. It's just, but you know, like Chairman Dixon said, the money is a real problem, and it has been. And I don't see us piling a lot more money in education. I mean, we do every year. You know, every time we do the supplemental budget, we go back and put more money in for schools that have increased in enrollment, and we always are focusing on that. But I think at this time, if we can incentivize it some way, and that, I don't know that we're going to make that decision today, but I have trust in our chairman in her wisdom that I would be comfortable for you speaking for us if you find a way. Or, you know, I know you'll notify us. I got a string of emails. I was showing how I got all my emails from you. But to me, that seems like the most logical approach and most humane approach with these counselors, you know. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
That's very valuable, 2 cents, and I want to get to everybody, but I don't want to leave that without asking out here, and I don't want to put you on the spot. If I am, you tell me. But Dr. Ziegler or Ms. Smith, do you know a way that we could do what we're hearing off the top of your head? And I know it's just your opinion right now.
There was some talk from Mr. Woods about possibly linking it to the CCRPI. That's where schools are really focusing on, because that's where they're earning their points. So there's on the backside, there's an exceeding the bar where they earn additional bonus points. And you can have to time it somewhere on exceeding the bar for like having a recognized ASCA national model or program. That may be one way that would be an incentive.
Okay.
And I agree with Dr. Ziegler. The other part of this, and I understand local control, I totally respect that. But if we go back to that 80-20, 80% in direct services, which we already have in law and is already in DOE language, and let local systems decide how that's going to look. And if it means bringing in a clerk to file half-time, or if it means, in some districts, having someone come in and do the mental health piece, or if it means bringing in a college advisor to help with that, that gives our districts enough, they have enough flexibility to decide how that will look. We're not dictating that. But if we don't draw the line somewhere, then it becomes 20-80, where 20% of the time we're working with our students. And that's happening in some schools. And that's what the whole purpose of this was, to start moving that needle away, you know, more from the 20% to the 80%. So I'm still thinking of system flexibility, but staying firm with that 80% recommendation. And how it looks, CCRPI is a place to start. Implementing a comprehensive program that we've defined for you is a place to start at.
Okay, thank you, because this may be what we may need to, a recommendation to come out of this committee, and then I'll have to get with the superintendent and see exactly how this will look. And Ms. Smith, before we leave your comments, you're saying you think we need to do something with 80-20, even though, as you've heard, there's really no way to enforce it, to put teeth to it. We could have legislation, but we have flexibility.
Tie it to the CCO.
To tie it, to that, to the CCRPI. Okay. Sure. Okay. We can. That's something we might be able to easily do.
There's a way to track that 80%. I mean, there are recommended ways through ASCA to do that.
Yes.
And local districts can work that out, however it works best for them. So,
Okay.
And GSCA could help with
Okay.
that in that regard.
But let me just say, we need to be careful that in saying we want that incentivized and it has to be tracked, that we don't create another paperwork burden that has to, that the counselor has to do. So, I mean, let's be cautious in that. Create the incentive, but make sure that there's a way to do it that's not going to simply create more of a burden.
And these folks can probably respond to that better than I can. But the other side of that is counselors need to be keeping data showing what they're doing with their time, if for no other reason to send out a newsletter to their faculty members so their faculty members know what's going on. And I think, I don't know if most, but many school counselors do that, I think, Chairman, already. You all know better than I. We used to report this to the state, counselors used to, but that's not being done now. Is that correct? Okay. All right, I'm sorry. I don't know who was first. Okay, let's go to the lady. Representative Clark.
I would do anything for bonus points. I think that's a very good idea. I would really work hard for those. And because I did hire, I took care of my counselors, but my number one priority was our students, of course. And if I had a quarter of a point, I might put it together with something else to make a teacher point to lower student-teacher ratio. But in turn, I was able to hire retired counselors and at a quarter of a point, part-time counselors to help with that ratio, to help with that burden too. So that's something else to think of. But the answer, Dr. Ziegler and Chairman Nix and Chairman Dixon, I think that's it, to incentivize. That's a very good idea, to incentivize.
And Representative Gazaway.
Well, I know we're in the recommendation phase and I'm still asking questions, but Chairman Dixon's point about somebody has to do the work is one we all understand. And in business, you get into economic situations that you're in chaos mode, and it happens in any kind of industry. And maybe is this a byproduct of because all three of my systems are, I think, still furloughing teachers. One system started with 12 furlough days this year. So I may be representing the area that is especially hard hit by the economic or some other related economic situation. So the people that have historical perspective, is this problem a byproduct of 2009, 10, and 11 and what happened in our state, or is this, okay, that answers my question. I'm sorry I'm still asking questions, but if we're just in a crisis and that's not the best place to make policy, we all know that, but this is external to the economic collapse. Okay, thank you.
Now, we want to hear your questions. They're valuable in this. Well, I am too. I'm hearing then, I think, from committee members, from everybody, that the best thing, maybe the number one thing we need to state, is to recommend that DOE develop, and we can put some, I'll work on the verbiage to make it a little more succinct and clear, but do something to incentivize school systems to use the counselor in a more appropriate and effective manner. Is that what I'm hearing? Everybody? Chairman? Okay. All right.
Madam Chair, one of the other things that we talked about too, educate school leaders on the role of the counselor. Mm-hmm. How many of you counselors out there are good salespeople? Somehow you're going to have to sell your services as being worth a whole lot more than being a clerk. Now, I don't know how you do that. There's obviously a tremendous amount of value there, but I don't know how how do you make that administrator know that you need to be doing your counseling duties rather than some clerical function? And I don't know how you do that. There's got to be some salesmanship somehow that does that. We did have that down, and I do want us to make sure we have that as a recommendation, that the school leaders are it's on the list, but that the school leaders are made aware of what the counselors are supposed to be doing and why that is important. Because as Chairman Dixon said, the jobs have got to be done, but if you've got that person that what they're doing is a whole lot more important than the menial job they've got them doing, then they're going to have them doing that job. And somehow, like I say, maybe you're going to have some salesmen out there to sell your worth to some extent. And I don't know how you do that. I come from a business background where you had to sell. Sometimes you have to generate your own demand, if you will. But that there's got to be some way to promote that value, so that rather than you having to tell them, look, I don't need to be doing this, they'll be calling you, look, we need your services here, here, and here, a lot more than we need you filing this paperwork. And y'all help me. I don't know where that is. I've sold a little bit of everything from syrup to stocks, so I know how to sell, but I'm not sure how you sell this.
Yeah.
I think it is. I think it is.
We're not picking up any of their comments on the recording.
That's what I did to sell our program, and had principal after principal support our role in working directly with students, because we had data to show the impact it had on our graduation rates, on our enrollments in SAT and ACT.
And there's points and everything that goes all along with that. So
It may go back to keeping up with that data and being able to go in to an administrator and say, look, but I can do more if.
yeah.
But I don't know, Chairman Nix, how you convince every counselor to do that. But our putting it as part of the CCRPI,
Yeah.
their role might help
Yeah.
with that.
Sure.
A lot of things about test coordination and counselors having to do test coordination. That's a massive undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
Kids in where they need to be in the right test and check them off. That time would be better spent in test preparation,
Mhm.
test taking skills, and showing that increase of test scores as opposed to counting tests and making sure you have the number of answer sheets and that type of thing. That's just more than that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure you got an answer, but we know there's a need there. Okay, I've heard what you're saying about the CCRPI. I've heard what you're saying about leader preparation. That's in Dr. Hill's recommendations. Let me go to this item. What about, we've heard a lot about about a counselor evaluation form. I have talked to the school superintendent about this. He has said, don't do any legislation, give me a year. He asked that we recommend that there be he said he would be fine with a recommendation that there be a development of a school counselor evaluation form that would be used statewide. So is that something that you'd like to include in the recommendations? If that will.
I would think so.
Okay.
If that's on his radar, which obviously it is.
And that I think he is concerned about that. He sees a need for that. He readily does. And let me go to another issue that's not as easy but it relates to some of the things we've talked about. One of the things that we heard about, and it is an item that we have heard talk about, could we do some legislation on? And that was regarding waivers, eliminating waivers for IE Square and charter schools to waivers for counselors because of personal and safety issues. And I understood from the superintendent that there have been no requests for waivers for school counselors, and that if any came across his desk, they would go nowhere. But that is because that only covers the counseling positions that are state funded. That does not include local funded ones. However, if we try to do anything about that, we're getting into flexibility. and we know how important that is, and that's an item that we might not want to touch. I'd like to hear your opinion on that. Representative Clark.
I totally agree not to get involved in that, because your student-teacher ratio is all important also. So there needs to be that balance, but you need to be able to have that flexibility. If it's a struggling school and test scores are low, the counselor may make the difference or the teacher may make the difference. So you need to have that flexibility to make that decision.
Anybody else? Thank you. All right. We will leave that alone. We're not going to touch it, but we'll come back to that at another point in time. Going back to Chairman Nick's, I'm sorry. Oh, thank you. Going back to Chairman Nick's comment when we first began about the, let me see, how did you say this? We were talking about the funding, consider funding for placing a career specialist in each RESA. And I wonder if we couldn't tie with that recommendation, if everyone is for that, Dr. Hill's first recommendation on the sheet that I sent you of his recommendations, and that is, it is recommended that the Professional Standards Commission establish requirements for counselor training related to college and career readiness and equitable opportunities for students to receive appropriate services from counselors. Such training should be incorporated into pre-service and professional learning opportunities. I think we could tie those together if that is your thought. I do feel like we've heard from those that have spoken the need for more training in careers for school counselors. Your thoughts? Representative Gazaway.
It's a question from me.
That's
are you
right.
saying put a trainer at the RESAs to do specific continuing ed for the counselors? Is that what? Let me understand what you're saying.
I'm not sure what I'm saying, and maybe Chairman Nix can respond better, and I have an opinion, but I don't know that it's correct. Chairman Nix.
I'm not sure that I was saying that let's put a trainer at the RESA level, but someone there who has the responsibility to make sure that the students get that career counseling. And it could be something that goes back to where I was talking about tying it in with the data system, where students could be directed to the portal to get that counseling, and parents could be directed there also. I don't know, maybe there's benefit of having the trainer, but the counselor should have some training in that area already. So that was not that was not what I was thinking. I was thinking of having someone there whose sole function is kind of like the PBIS. That's what I was kind of modeling it off of. We decided we needed some expertise in the PBIS that could be drawn down to the school level, but we can't afford to put somebody in every school, so we did it from the RESA level. That's more the model that I'm looking at, where you would have someone at that RESA level whose primary function is to see that there's career counseling done. They're not going to be responsible for the other counseling issues there. So whether or not that includes training, I think one of the things here was talking about training all members of the staff to be career counselors to some extent. But that's not what I had in mind. I had in mind more the person to be responsible, so that if you've got those schools who do not have the ability to get that done, they could call their RESA and have that person from the RESA come in with that expertise to help them out.
And it's my understanding that that is true in a lot of small systems that don't have the resources that maybe some of these larger systems might have.
Yeah.
So, and again, we're talking about money.
That's about a $750,000 about a $750,000 ad right there, somewhere in that neighborhood.
When we did PBIS, now we did it at lower levels than that.
Halftime, we put halftime with PBIS.
Okay. Well, surely there's a little bit of money laying around out there somewhere.
Could you find us that
I'm
much?
trying to think. What is your area?
I get $17,000 a year. You could take, a tenth of that.
Are you talking about our doing legislation along those lines, Chairman, or recommending that?
I don't think we want to try to do legislation along those lines, but we need to have that expectation out there that there is another avenue or an avenue to get it done.
Okay.
And if we could fund it at some level to at least get it started, and see, maybe have a pilot program, see the benefit of it somehow. How much does a pilot cost?
I understand pilots are real cheap.
Yeah. Depends on which plane they're flying, right?
I mean, the recommendation might could be to ask the Reeses to come up with a plan that we could look at and see. I mean, the Reese directors could be a resource to help decide is that a model that would be efficient? Is it attainable?
And it could be it could be something too that could draw in other community resources to help with it too. So maybe that's a better way to look at it. I don't, but somehow we need to. The whole idea I had was somehow having somebody somewhere who's responsible for making sure that is getting done. So.
Is it all right? Are we in agreement that we could do what Chairman Dixon has said and ask the Reeses to begin to develop this plan, and then we could come back to that another year and look at that, see if we could get the money if we started early, right?
You got to move the needle somewhere, so we might have some very innovative RISA director out there somewhere who could really come up with something that would be very good. So I'm for moving it in some way, and if that's the only way or the best way we've got right now, I think certainly.
Well, I think I'm hearing that it is. Is that everybody
okay with that?
Everybody's okay.
And if we come up with that extra $750 million, we'll.
Would you remember that, please? It goes to.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll take it.
Okay, let's see. What else have we not mentioned that you're concerned about, that you want to see in our recommendations? Look over them. Take just a minute and look over them. Let's do that. Yes, Representative Clark.
I'm sitting too close to Mr. Gazaway. I'm catching the question fever. Do you find the emphasis on career aptitude tests to be great enough? Are they beneficial to our students, our aptitude tests?
Well, I'm going to answer that as a former school counselor, and then these folks can. Absolutely.
See, I felt like that. I felt like it was very helpful to our children to have those in 8th grade and 9th grade.
And even later. Because they get a little more serious as they move along.
Yes, ma'am.
When we're talking about college and career readiness, personally, I can't think of anything that we could do that would be more helpful along those lines than to do something, I don't know, make them available, we need money, for aptitude testing or whatever. And many counselors are already doing this. Now, am I wrong? You're in the field. I'm not. Please tell us. Is it is this a valuable tool?
Extremely valuable. It helps to guide the student into the appropriate career field, what type of post-secondary training they're going to need. It's extremely valuable tool to have in advising students with regards to their future.
Channels their interests. Is that right? Are we doing it across the state routinely, or is it just something that we might do in some areas?
We're doing career interest inventories across the state. That is a part of the bridge bill, built into CCRPI for our middle schoolers. So that is happening, but not necessarily the aptitude.
I see. Thank you.
Having the option to take the ASVAB in high school.
That's right.
That is such a great thing.
It is.
And of course, it's research based. A lot of kids opt out of that, or parents, because then their recruiters get involved in their lives. But that's free for our students.
And that is such a good instrument. Thank you for mentioning that, Dr. Ziegler.
I was actually going to say the same thing about the ASVAB. It's a free resource, and we used to give it to all of our juniors. And the military actually paid the school because we administered everyone with the option of not taking them if the parents were judged. But it's proven for every military job is a civilian job, and they do a good job on interpreting the results and helping the students out. And there's a correlation to the SAT scores as well.
Yes. It is a wonderful instrument, but it's my understanding that more and more parents are opting out of that testing, and kids are missing it, which is unfortunate because it's free, like you're saying. I've seen aptitude testing make kids decide they need to start thinking about careers and college or technical school. So yes, but I'm not sure I know how to include it in here. If you have a suggestion, please tell me. Sure.
There's a pilot, I think it's in Texas that's kind of spearheaded that.
It's in where?
There's a pilot program that's either about to take place or taking place with U Science, which is aptitude. And that's going on, I believe, this year. And Marietta City Schools have used aptitude.
I heard that.
And I believe there's been some planning or something to have a pilot program across the state.
Okay. Well, we can recommend consideration of aptitude testing if you all want to do that. Tell me what your thoughts are, or what do we do with this? We know there's a pilot. Do we just leave that alone and go from there? Yes, Miss Smith. You may.
Most of those, like that pilot, is, let's say all 10th graders would take it, or all 8th graders would take it, whatever. But most of the time, those are administered as part of the overall assessment program in the district, where counselors don't oversee it. They may be involved in monitoring or planning, but it's not something that falls in their wheelhouse, so to speak. What we would want out of it is to be able to spend the time with kids to interpret
Yes.
the scores and to help the kids connect the dots between academics, interest, and aptitude.
And I certainly agree with you. And again, we're talking about more counselor time, but we're talking about counselors doing what they're supposed to be doing anyway. And my experience has been that many times kids don't get very serious about any of this, even though we try to start in middle school until they get into high school. So maybe aptitude testing there, but I don't know where this belongs in here. I need help. Representative Clark, do you have an idea you want to share?
What kind of cost would this Got to go back to the money man over there.
Well, maybe we should say how much money could we get to do it in a few systems, or could we tie it?
Doesn't know how to do it.
Or could we tie it into CCRPI some way? Could we go back to that requirement? But then again, we're talking about money, Chairman. I just don't know how to do that. Representative Clark, did you have a thought?
Well, it wouldn't be a very nice thought, because I was thinking you would tie it into the counselors' evaluation that they do this. Because they have the opportunity with the ASVAB.
But they can't override parents, as you well know.
Oh, correct.
I would I'd be real hesitant to make it a part of the evaluation. There's too many instances where they wouldn't have the capacity or the support to do that, and that makes it very unfair to say that's a part of
You're
your
right.
evaluation.
You're absolutely right. I was just trying to brainstorm something, but he is exactly correct.
Can I have that in writing, please?
It may never happen again, right?
It happens.
We have a comment, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Honeycutt, I didn't see your hand up.
Yes, I'm Dr. Lynn Honeycutt. I work in Social Circle, City Schools. I worked in Gwinnett, Rockdale, and Hall counties too. I just had a thought about, with all the advent of moving the GCIS with the Georgia Finance Commission, and it's going to be a total picture of Georgia futures, it would seem like there could be more interest inventories added to that program. It's still Georgia 411, but it seemed like that would be the ideal place to place it, because then it holds all those aptitude tests on there that students take, and it consolidates all that. It just seems like that would be the ideal place for that to be.
That's a good point. So you're saying encourage GCIS to incorporate it into, or Georgia Futures to incorporate it, and the aptitude testing.
To add more aptitude tests, or to try to train more for Georgia to use throughout the state, because that would be, all schools in Georgia would have access to that, but also counselors could review results from that, ideally once it's all incorporated or once all put together. And also the students would be able to have access to their results too, once they had been, went in and took an aptitude test such as that.
That sounds like something that would work. Or could we recommend that that be considered? That's all we're doing, is recommending that it be added. And then I wish we could think of a way to encourage counselors to get on that site and then individually sit down with students, but I'm not sure that's a feasible thing we could do. Am I wrong? Maybe I'm wrong.
And you all need to sit down with her as she's writing this report to help her with that kind of language.
I assure you I'll call on them. All those folks. Now, look over again, take a few minutes and see if there's anything we've missed before, because I told you we'd be out of here at noon, and we're going to be. But we've done great. But I want to be sure we haven't omitted anything.
This, that whole page of mental health stuff, is that something that we can refer on to more appropriate committee.
Chairman Dixon mentioned the comprehensive mental health state strategic plan that we have in here as recommendations. If that could be, would that be more appropriately placed somewhere else? And I believe, Chairman Nix, you helped me with this, but I think from our meeting yesterday on mental health of children, that study committee, it is probably going to be a part of that. Is that what?
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. Chairman Dempsey's committee has touched on that. I think we had the same information there, and probably more appropriate to be there, even though the counselors are dealing with these issues. That was not the specific intent of this committee, as it is with that one, to deal with that. So I think probably that will be part of that recommendations from that committee.
Thank you. That should be there. Okay, let me mention I want to see what you got too.
Giving school counselors access to the student information system.
I don't know what this means, and I don't know from where it came. It says expand access to student information system to all schools counselors to generate status reports on students' educational progress. Somebody help me know what that means and from where it came. Yes, Ms. Smith.
That was a recommendation made by GSCA. It was born out of conversations we have with school counselors all over the state who struggle getting to the data they need to identify students who are struggling so they know how to target interventions. It's not readily available to the practitioner. They have to look for it sometimes. It's in a lot of different places. So we were envisioning a dashboard or building out SIS so we could get to our school's data and our district's data more efficiently, and so that we can do what we need to do in our jobs. The status report part of it, we learned about a district in Fresno that is a high-risk, California, that's a high-risk district. And at that district level, of course not California, they built in a student status report so that at a punch of a button, a counselor can see where a student stands in terms of progress toward graduation and identify equity gaps. So it disaggregates data to see if there are any individuals or subgroups who aren't taking certain college preparatory coursework. I know it's kind of a sophisticated system, but we were quite envious of that. If we could punch a button and find out which of our subgroups are not taking AP courses or which of our subgroups aren't taking foreign language, that would help to strengthen the counselors advising in that career and college preparation.
Has anybody talked with Bob Swigum about that? I mean, that's what he does. That's.
Right. We chatted a few years ago, not about this specifically, but about building out SIS to make it more user friendly at the district level. But that was just a few conversation.
Do y'all have those kind of conversations over at the Department of Education to say, hey, this is something that would help the folks in my area?
We talked about the longitudinal data system and how that can be enhanced as well.
Has he indicated? Has he indicated that he can work on that? Okay.
I tried to meet with him this week, but we just couldn't get together. But I think, Dr. Ziegler, if you could talk with him, because that may be the way to handle this, Ms. Smith, in a very appropriate manner. Is that okay with that?
And also, I know when I talked to Bob just briefly and was talking about this committee, he was the one that said that there may be some opportunities to do some of the career-related issues or career counseling where you would have programs on there that they could go and look at. So he might be a great resource for a number of different ways, and he's a very creative man. And he, when I mentioned it to him, he immediately went into this thought process, well, we could do this, 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 and this. So I think there are probably a lot of opportunities not only in this area, but through that system to be able to do even some of the career counseling too. So I would definitely say that he needs to be in the talking process and planning process.
And it may be that GSCA would like to sit down, would make an appointment and sit down and talk to him. And Ms. Smith, you indicate what you vision here. Okay. I have a few things that I think have not been mentioned that I'd like to just be sure you either want to include them, do not, whatever it is. One of them was to encourage DOE to adopt a comprehensive school counseling program that would be adopted statewide. Consideration should be given to the program delivered by the American School Counselor Association. Now, I think you all are already wanting to do that, Dr. Ziegler. Am I right?
I just have not actually talked with Mr. Woods and Chief Staff Matt Mills. Kind of wait to see what came out of all this as well.
Would it help if we recommended that? Well, oh, I pulled it from somewhere. I don't know where. Can you
just read from?
Oh, my notes. I'm sorry, I pulled it from somewhere, and I don't know from where I pulled it. I met, as when I talked with Superintendent Woods, if I understood our conversation correctly, he is very much for seeing this developed. As you know, he was very supportive of Alabama's plan that was proposed. That's. Mm-hmm. May we put this in our report? Is that all right with anybody object?
I think given the current status of what we've been talking about earlier, the number of things that counselors are asked to do in many systems, I think we need to be careful about creating a mandate that directs their services go in a very lockstep kind of manner. Encouraging them to move in that direction is one thing, but I would have problems with anything that comes down as a mandate. Certainly, some of the counselors that I talked with from my area were resistant to that.
Yes, and I believe I shared with everybody an email I received from somebody who said he was representing a group of counselors in his area, and he expressed a great deal of concern along those lines too. But that could be something that in the development of this, that would be taken into consideration, not to be a mandate. Yes. So may we include it just as a recommendation? Are you okay with it? And then DOE could handle that. Couple of others. I have one that was to encourage school counselors to participate in business and industry externship for a minimum of 3 days per year. Counselors will need to work with local CTAE directors, and I added, and local technical colleges to determine the best work site placement each year. Do we want to encourage school counselors to do that? Again, we're putting something else on their plate, but we're talking about college and career readiness information. Remember, counselors know about going to college. Yes, Representative Hawkins.
Should we think about, because I've been listening to Chairman Dixon and everyone else, should we think about maybe breaking our recommendations into within a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years and classify them that way? Because this apple's getting so big it looks like a watermelon right now.
You're right.
Just an idea.
Can we come back to that in a minute? Good idea. Good idea. It is getting too big, but getting really big.
They're all valuable.
Yeah.
I'm not discounting that. It's
I just don't want to omit anything that somebody has taken the time, to come and present to us. That's what I'm trying. So we'll come back to that thought. does anybody have a problem with that recommendation? It's just an encouragement.
Well, yeah.
I don't know whether it's of value or not.
The word says require.
Oh, well, let's change that. Maybe we need to say not, maybe we can't require anybody
Encourage.
to do
I
anything.
think certainly encourage and
Encourage it as a best practice.
encourage it as
Yeah.
a best
Oh,
practice.
that's a
Encourage it,
good idea. As
yeah.
a,
Encourage the districts to facilitate that if they can.
okay.
Because I do think that's a very important part for the counselors. As you said, put something else on their plate, but if it was done right, I think it would be something that they would, that they could enjoy and probably get a great deal of benefit from.
I think so too. And so we'll use that as an encouragement. And then I have two others quickly. One is study the creation of possible recognitions incentives for school districts that successfully implement college and career readiness and equity programs that result in improved graduation rates, post-secondary entry completion rates. My question to you all, is that already not included in CCRPI? That in something like that okay. Study the creation of possible recognitions incentives for school districts that successfully implement college and career readiness and equity programs that result in improved graduation rates, post-secondary entry completion rates.
There are already indicators on the CCRPI that talk about graduation rate, pathway completers, students entering post-secondary without the need for remediation. There are several things already on there that are being, data's collected on that already, so I'm not sure what else would be added.
They're wanting a recognition. They're wanting
Yes.
award of a prize for doing that beyond CCRPI. It sounds like.
Does that reflect, and I don't think the term is, I'm using the correct term, is that reflected in a school's report card? It would be, wouldn't it?
Maybe that exceeding bar about having a recognized program, that might touch on that as well. If that was added to the exceeding bar, that incentive piece, that would be utilizing a good use of time and having a model program. That if you do that, then all those other things will occur as well.
Good point. Could we add it to that section then, or request that it be added? Or no?
I don't know. I just think that sometimes the reward is that you get to see students doing well.
And this watermelon is getting bigger. I don't know.
It's starting to get heavy. Yeah.
Okay. I think we all hear that. And sometimes it's better to make a couple of recommendations instead of 20, and then something will get done. And we're to the 20 point now. Not really, but we're getting there.
This question popped into my mind. We're asking questions. Is there a program for a counselor of the year like we have a teacher of the year? Okay.
Yes, that is done. Remember, we've had 3 of the national winners to speak to us, so yes.
Okay.
That's done.
Okay.
And that would definitely include what's being done along these lines.
Yeah. So there's a reward there that kind of ties into it somewhat. I would think.
The state.
Okay.
I think I'm hearing you say, mark this one off.
Yes.
Am I?
So,
Okay. Anybody object? Okay. I have one other one, and then we'll come quickly to what Representative Hawkins has said. If you look at number 2 in Dr. Hall's recommendations, and it is I'll read it for you all out there. It is recommended that counselors be supported in providing post-secondary advisement by requiring school districts to establish advisement programs in high schools similar to those recommended by the Southern Regional Educational Board and used in its High Schools That Work network. Such programs would allow counselors to train all faculty as advisors who would be equipped to deliver an advisement curriculum through homeroom or advisement sessions. The Professional Standards Commission should create an advisement endorsement that will provide teams from schools with the knowledge and skills to successfully develop and implement such an advisement system. I'm going to give you my bias before we even do anything else, if you'll allow me as chairman. We're circling. We've done this so many times in education. Do we need this? And I need to ask you all too, because I don't know that. Any comments from the representatives about this? And do you know what it's saying? Yes. Does it make sense to everybody? Yes. Okay. Your opinions. Do we need this, or is this something we could leave out and maybe condense these things a little bit? I think we all hate to speak out we're not being negative. I know none of us are. It's a great program. That's what it is. Mm-hmm.
It's a great program when done correctly.
Mm-hmm.
It could burden the counselors, but that's not the issue as much as there's already something in place with that. We need to probably update some of the activities that are out there, but there's from 6th grade on through 12th grade, there are already activities available online for counselors, teachers to access and utilize. Again, some of them need to be updated just because of verbiage. But as far as that might be one of those other things that could be on incentive as part of their national or as part of their school model program on that exceeding the bar. If they're utilizing teachers for that, and they do give them some bonus points as well.
But do we want to add anything else to that at this point? We're talking about adding two things. Should we leave that alone? You have a comment?
I mean, the language that you read was require this and require that, and I'm not inclined to think that that's a wise move.
You agree? Others? Okay.
Hopefully, just from having some of these discussions, it will highlight the need for that, because if it's already out there that it's in place, if our counselors are having trouble getting the career counseling done, if they could somehow incorporate this would be good. I don't think we need to require it, but hopefully by at least discussing it, maybe it will point out to them some of the ways that they could get some help with this. But I too don't like the idea of requiring that to be done.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I was listening. It didn't seem like it, Chairman Nix, but I did hear what you were saying. I could hear out of this ear. Okay, I'm sorry. Remember, women can do that. And I don't want to lose anybody, but quickly, I want to read two comments I received this morning in an email, so I couldn't send them on. And this was from one of our presenters. Recommend that school systems, and this is somebody affiliated with DOE, recommend that school systems should fully utilize the skills of all school counselors in their ever-increasing role with opportunities and challenges of move on when ready, a growing numbers of career pathways choices, the mental health needs of students, the increasing reliance of parents on the expertise of school counselors, the need for school counselors to facilitate a coordinated school-based support system for all students, and the expanding role of school counselors working with teachers to improve student outcomes. I thought, wow, that could just be our recommendation. Do you want us to include it? It's pretty comprehensive. It might be that I could leave out some of the others and include that. Any thoughts?
I think I have a little problem with saying to school systems and the school principals and the school counselors, do the best that you can. I mean, that goes without saying, doesn't it? I mean, when I was responsible for school principals, I didn't think I had to say to them, I want you to do your job. I mean, that's the bottom line for it. I mean, yeah, those are all good things that counselors should be involved in, but that's kind of what their job description says, isn't it?
We're covering that in some other areas.
Yeah, I think so much of that's already covered.
Okay. And besides being the money man, you're also our school superintendent on here. So we need to hear from you. One other one. Perhaps your committee could recommend that the state superintendent formally advise local superintendents to fully utilize the skills of school counselors and avoid reducing the number of counselors, avoid altering their responsibilities in ways that could jeopardize their value to students, other staff members, and parents. Is that the same thing? Okay.
I think he's bought into what we're doing, so that's
Okay.
without saying, I think.
All right. All right. Any 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 5 years ideas?
You know, I think it'd be left up to the chairman on that. Oh, really? I
I was
mean,
afraid you'd say that.
You and Chairman Dexter have more experience in this than you do. I threw that out simply because I've been doing this now for 10 years, not as long as Tom and others, but on study committees, I have repeatedly seen that we came out with great ideas, only to have them condensed to 2 or 3, and the other things get lost and forgotten.
Yeah.
And we've done
That's
a lot
a
of
good
hard work
idea.
here, and a lot of study, and heard a lot of good folks and recommendations. And that's one reason I bring that up. I don't know if we've done that in the past. Maybe it's not workable, but, you know, I just hate for this to be thrown away, some of it.
Well, why don't you put your list together, and then you and I can sit down and say, prioritize them.
Yes, I think it would be good for us to prioritize. In fact, I somewhat thought I had done that as we've gone through, but maybe I haven't. But we will get together and do that, if that's okay with everybody. All right, well, let me thank you again. I hope it's been a good experience. I've certainly learned a lot. We're glad you all were here, because what would we have done today without you folks here? We would have really been in trouble, wouldn't we? Thank y'all so much.